We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. And surprise, this is the second episode of AV Rant this week because on Monday we posted an interview with Jason Ehrlich from Kinetics Noise Control Incorporated. We didn't pre-announce it because Lord only knows what might happen when we schedule interviews and then technical things happen or schedules change or whatever, so we didn't tease it. It came out as a pleasant surprise, hopefully, for everyone on our avrant.com website and AVRant YouTube page.
Yeah, it was still like 20 minutes of trying to get everything to line up.
It sure was.
So this finely oiled machine that is the AVRant podcast.
Indeed.
I had no excuse for not being here at 10 a.m., by the way. I mean, I did, but it wasn't a great one. I didn't cycle today like I usually do, but because it was raining, and I'm like the Wicked Witch of the East, and I melt. Or West? I don't remember. One of those. But my son does have a summer camp that he's going to, a STEM camp.
Okay.
That he's going to, so I dropped him off at 9 a.m. by the time I got back, and the traffic and everything else. And I don't know.
Tom is just
and
so
I hurt my arm climbing.
So focused on home theater.
I'm mad because apparently at 50 I break down.
Well,
so
that's how it goes.
I guess so.
Are we going to get back to what we've watched? Because we kind of left it off last week because we had so many questions to get to, but we did a pretty good job on that. So yeah, going back to our fun intros, what we watched. Of course, this is like 2 weeks worth, so I will not belabor too many of these. But the only movie I watched in those 2 weeks was Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. Which
it's an older movie, isn't it? It's a couple of years.
Oh, it's a few years, going back a few years. Yeah. Evergreen was the only real star name that I knew out of that movie. She plays the titular Miss Peregrine.
Who?
Evergreen.
Ava Green. I thought you said Evergreen. I'm like the tree.
I think it's Eva.
Okay, Ava
I think
Green.
she goes Eva. I'm not certain. Anyway,
I love her.
Yes.
She's great.
She played Vesper Lind in Casino Royale. Yes. So in case you're wondering who that is.
I loved her in what was the horror thing I liked? That
yes.
TV show.
There was a horror thing, and I can picture it, and I can't name it off the top of my head.
I'll get it. You keep going.
Yes, that's right. In any case, so they were clearly trying to start a franchise. With this, I didn't realize going in it was directed by Tim Burton. It did not feel like a Tim Burton movie. This clearly had a whole bunch of studio oversight, I would think. There's a few little moments he got to sneak in his Tim Burton-ness, but it certainly didn't feel like a
it's
regular...
kind of like Sam Raimi and the most recent
Multiverse
thing
of
where
Madness.
you're like, wait a second, that feels like Sam Raimi there.
Right.
And it was.
He snuck in little places, so I can't say I was over the moon about it. I don't remember it setting the world on fire as far as box office or anything goes. Penny Dreadful. That was the one. That's the other thing she's in.
First 2 seasons, don't watch the third. Go on.
I thought the movie started much more strongly than it ended. I quite enjoyed the opening parts of it, where it was all kind of being questioned whether this thing is real or whether his grandfather is kind of making it all up. And I really quite enjoyed that whole relationship being built up there and everything that happened to start things off. But by the end, it was pretty silly, and the musical cues that the needle drops that they put in there, I was like. So I know there's the saying that you can take any footage and put any music over it, and in a fashion it will work. It'll always work somehow. It'll do something. You put any needle drop over any piece of footage, and it'll work in a way. Well, I will declare that this one didn't. In the big fight scene, that the needle drop they did not work. Certainly didn't have the effect I think they were trying to go for. So yeah, thumbs leaning towards down on that one, unfortunately. Although not terrible, but wouldn't give it a big thumbs up. I also completed the first season that has just ended of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Huge thumbs up for that. So glad to have proper Star Trek back. It actually felt like Star Trek. Thank goodness. I've been quite disappointed with Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard. So we've got the animated shows that are quite good, and Strange New Worlds, which is excellent. So really happy with that.
Okay. Is that the captain guy who plays that? Is that the same dude who was the what's his name, Black Bolt?
It sure is. It's Anson Mount. He's very, very good. Very, very likable.
Yeah.
So I've been keeping up with shows that are still airing. The Orville, New Horizons, which for me is on Disney Plus. I think it's on Hulu in the States.
It's on Hulu for me. I've watched maybe 2 or 3 episodes of that.
Yeah, being on Hulu, they have done away with any time limits. So some of these are getting well over an hour. But I don't feel like it's been dragging. I do feel like they've allowed themselves to let some scenes go on a little bit longer than it would have if it were broadcast TV. But, I mean, the increased budget and increased time is obvious. They have put it on the screen. The quality of the special effects, or the visual effects, rather, is way higher. They've upgraded everything. The music is outstanding. So that is a huge thumbs up. They have basically done away with all the humor, though. It is just Star Trek The Next Generation now. And there's whatever amount of humor there was in that, it's similar.
His humor and Star Trek did not really go together.
I thought the second season struck a nice balance.
Season was better.
I thought it struck a really nice balance.
The first season, it was a little bit too many, and now we're going to have some middle school humor for a couple of beats, and then we're going to go back to being serious science space people.
Yeah, but this one is really quite serious throughout. There's little moments of levity, but not much. So also keeping up with Only Murders in the Building. Second season of that is back. Again, for me, it's on Disney Plus. I think, is that a Hulu show in the States? I don't know where that one goes. Only Murders in the Building.
Hulu, yeah.
That's on Hulu. Okay, so really quite enjoying that. And Better Call Saul, of course. The last 6 episodes have now begun. The 2 of the last 6 have aired. So, we'll see how that all wraps up. The last 2 episodes have done things that have seemed inevitable because we know where things go in Breaking Bad, but they pulled it off really quite well. And then started a couple new shows, which are not new, but new to me. The Afterparty. It's an Apple TV Plus show, which quite fun. Short episodes, it's comedy, it's a murder mystery, but it's done very, very lighthearted, and every episode is basically the account of what has gone on at the after party where a murder took place from one particular character's perspective, and therefore each episode is like a little parody of a movie genre based on how that person views the world. So that's sort of the hook to that show. And Arcane, League of Legends on Netflix. That is an animated show, and I
started that, but don't remember liking it that much.
Really? I will straight up declare it the very best video game adaptation ever done on anything that is not the video game itself. I never played League of Legends. I know exceedingly little of it. I would have expected...
I know nothing.
I'm pretty sure the character Garen is like the most like generic hero character. He's nowhere in this show. It's not about him. They took other characters, tremendously expanded the backstory from the little bits that I gleaned of the character profiles online for the game. So I'm like, they just took a handful of characters and the settings and they ran with it as a show. They didn't try to make this into the video game, and I think that is great. I think they've done a stellar job. It's very emotional. It's very tense, and I find the visuals beautiful. I love the visual style of this, the animation style of this.
Better than Castlevania, huh?
Oh yeah, this is tops for me. This is way thumbs up. Huge new favorite. Not that I'm saying anything new, because the fans of Arcane on Netflix are like,
I've already heard that this is why I started watching it in the first place, was because I heard people just raving over it, and I know nothing about League of Legends, so I was like, oh, maybe I'll watch it. So I think I'll watch one episode.
I really don't think you need to, because I certainly don't. I'm obviously some things will be Easter eggs for people who love the games, but
sure.
Yeah. So anyway, love it so far.
I'm the same way with Love and Robots. Like I really like Love and Robots, but and I haven't. I started the 3rd, 2nd, whatever season they're on right now. I started it, but haven't finished it. I do that a lot. You guys might know this. I do that a lot. I start a season and then just like I just can't keep up with it for whatever reason, and that's silly. Finished Miss Marvel.
Yes, I have not yet. I've slowed down on that, so no spoilers for the ending of Ms. Marvel.
No worries. The son that we watched that with was off at camp for a week, and we had not caught the episode before that he left, so he was he was gone during the finale. So my wife and I watched them both together, not together, but she and I together, 2 different occasions, and finished that up. Liked it overall.
Okay,
I mean, I'm trying to make sure I'm not spoiling anything for you. You know her catchphrase, right?
Oh, yes.
You know the thing. They shoehorned it in there.
Oh, good.
They got it in there,
Okay.
but it was like very much out of my wife was like, "What did she say?" I'm like, "Yeah, that's
Well,
they didn't they really could have like I like that they put it there, but it didn't quite work."
it also doesn't come super naturally with her power set in the TV show versus the comics. So
the comic, not the comic, the cartoon that was out. She I don't remember what it's called. It's like, you know, Avengers Assembled or something, but then it changes names. So in the Secret Wars series of that, or you know, I don't know, season of that, she shows up a lot more frequently, and you see her get her powers, or you see her, you know, try to come up with a catchphrase. I had to come up with a better catchphrase. You know, she says it a couple of times, and then she does, and it actually, I thought they did a pretty good job with it there. It worked there. This was like, well, you knew she was going to say it eventually, so it was only a matter of time. Overall, as the series as a whole, I really, really liked it.
Okay,
I
good.
was very impressed. I mean, I said this to my wife, and you know, I don't know if this is virtue signaling or whatever, but as somebody who is fairly well traveled, my wife was born in Turkey and lived there until she was 9. And I've been there a couple of times, and I've traveled India and Nepal and other places. So I mean, I'm not an unworldly type of person. I had never heard of the partition like that. I had never.
Well, I mean,
heard
that
of
was
this.
the time when like Pakistan was created, essentially, right?
Exactly. No, I understand it. I got it. I got the gist of it now. But it's like I was like sitting there going, "How have I never heard of this? Like this seems like an important thing that I should have learned in school, or you know, just gotten passing from like having Indian
Didn't quite
friends
make it to
or
our
something
very
like that."
Eurocentric history classes in North America.
Well, I mean, I've worked with quite a few Pakistani people as well. So I mean, it's not. No, they weren't Pakistani. Sorry, I take that back. They were Bangladeshi. But I've had friends that grew up in the area or that part of the world. I would have thought that would have come up, but it didn't, and I felt really. I felt good. I felt good. I feel good that I now know about it. Now I can do some research on it, but. The fact that that it took a Marvel TV show to teach me some history is kind of sad.
Well, that's a bit like
for
Watchmen has had that effect too, both the comic and the series that is a sequel to the comic. I mean, real life events, and people are like, I never heard of this. How did I never hear of this? And here it is in comic book form or in television form. So I'm all for that because, you know, I mean, there are people now, like young people, who are not familiar with world wars, like, because everyone just doesn't talk about it because it's just taken as, well, everybody knows about that. But if you were just born, you know,
well, the Cold
5
War,
years ago,
the Cold War in particular is like my kids have no concept of what it's like to, I mean, even post, I mean, obviously they're all post, anything they can remember is post 9/11. So I mean that same sort of thing. All right, let's not get off.
Okay.
I also started watching Resident Evil, the series on Netflix, which I had heard. Well, I don't read reviews, right? Because I don't want to get spoiled for anything. But I saw a number of headlines that were suggesting that this was a good series. So you know, I am a Resident Evil fan. I played I somehow missed the first game, but I played the Resident Evil 2 like to the point like I could have speedrun it if speedrunning was a thing back then. Like I knew every bit of that.
That was kind of built into it, I think, to
out.
unlock Tofu. Didn't you have to basically speedrun it?
Yeah, the Tofu and the Gatling gun and unlimited bazooka and the different costumes and stuff like that. I mean, I had that thing completely locked down back in the day. But so I mean, I and then. On top of that, because I have this history with it, there's quite a few Twitch streamers that I'll watch when I'm just trying to unwind at night who will run or play those games. Okay. So I have kind of an idea of the characters and the history and some of the mythos behind it. Not total, but enough that I recognize names and stuff like that. So they've taken some characters that you recognize the names. I don't necessarily think that they're trying to take the story as is from any of the Resident Evil games, but they're kind of creating a new thing about it. But it's told in two time periods. It's like the right before the outbreak and then many years later.
Okay.
So you've got the same. I think it's the same character. It seems like the same character. I haven't.
So
really
they're basically
been
bookending the games. They're going on either side of the games, or
no? It's. I don't know. I don't know. It seems like they're taking some from the movies, some from the games. I mean, because the games have gotten really weird.
Yes.
Like the most recent ones, there's like
they really don't have anything to do with zombies anymore.
Yeah, it's all over the place. So it's like the early games kind of mythos with the Raccoon City and that sort of thing. So there is a Raccoon City, there is an Umbrella Corporation, and so I've watched the first two episodes. They're about an hour long. They're not slow, but they feel slow. You know what I mean? It's like I'm
maybe
not a huge fan
deliberate
of,
is the word. Sometimes they say it's deliberately paced when it
the
feels
flipping
like
back
that.
and forth between the time periods. I'm like, just pick one and kind of go with it. Can we just finish this one first and then you can kind of switch it over? So the flipping back and forth is a little jarring. So far 2 episodes, 2 cliffhangers. So kind of know that's coming for each one. But it's the actress, the main actress who's playing, and in the I guess the far future one, and then the ones that the 2 female girls who are supposed to be in middle school or high school are also very good. Everybody's very good. So and I don't know the actor's name, but he was the boss on Fringe. He was
Lance Reddick.
Probably. Okay. I don't know. Anyways, they're supposed to be in South Africa. So he's the dad. He plays Wesker.
He's Wesker.
Or whatever. Yeah. So I'm that's a different kind of casting choice, but he's fantastic. I mean, I'd watch him.
Yeah,
with
he's
the
always
paper.
good. He's got a great voice, great delivery.
Oh my God! I'm like, I mean, can you imagine having him as a father? And there is one scene where you only see him as a dad, and then he kind of shifts into like, I'm at work mode in one scene, and one of his daughters is in the room with him, and she's just talking to her sister later, and she's like, he got scary. And I'm like, he did get scary.
This being Netflix, did they release the entire season all at once? They're not doing it.
Yes, it's 8 episodes long, so I've watched a quarter of it so far, and it's engaging. I'm going to finish it. I do like the Resident Evil franchise, and even the Mila Jovovich, whatever her name is,
Mila Jovovich
movies are. Yeah, I'm not saying that. It's too hard. I'm sorry.
I'm pretty sure it should actually be Jovovich, but they just say Jovovich over here.
Anyways, so if you're into that sort of thing, the special effects are for the most part very good. There's one scene with a monster that is less good, but not terrible. Certainly not as not the sort of take you out of the moment thing. It just it's a little too colorful, if that makes sense. It looks a little bit too bright. But the zombies are all great. They're not slow zombies. We're back to fast zombies in this one. So get ready for that. All right. Anything else?
Nope,
Anything else?
Let's crack on.
All right. This is AVRant podcast that answers your home theater AV questions. Get your questions answered. All you have to do is ask us by emailing us a question at avrant.com. Go to our website. Check out our previous episodes as well as our show notes and our Flickr albums, which have all the pictures that we will be looking at while we're talking to you today. So if you don't want to watch our YouTube videos at youtube.com/avrant, which will have the pictures up on the screen, then you can go to the website and click on the Flickr album and follow along. You put them in order, don't you? I think in the Flickr album.
Same order that they come up on the show.
Yeah, okay. And then facebook.com/AVRant podcast. If you want to contact Rob directly, it's rob@avrant.com. His Twitter's at First Reflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com. My Twitter's at avrant_Tom. I will tell you, don't expect a very quick response if you hit me up at tom@avrant.com, because that email's been flaky ever since whatever the problems were before.
I'm pretty sure it's you get yours forwarded to your Gmail as well, and that just seems to be a problem. So might
it gets forwarded to a Gmail, which then gets forwarded to my Outlook on my.
Maybe just cut out the Gmail in the middle, because I'm pretty sure the Gmail filtering was definitely the problem in my case. I just sent it to my Outlook, and that works better.
Yeah. So, anyways. All right, let's thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, to support the podcast in some way, one of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com, click on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link. You can send us a PayPal donation. Once again, we want to thank Aras for doing that this week. He actually did it today.
Oh, okay.
So he barely made it in under the wire.
If you went with my rules,
there.
We should have cut it off and saved it for next week, but that's all right. Thank you very much, Aras, for the PayPal donation. We definitely appreciate your financial support.
And if you want to support us financially and ongoingly, but don't want to have to think about it, go to patreon.com/AVRantPodcast, where you can sign up to be a contributing, subscribing listener. So every month they'll take some money from you and give most of it to us. So we have 138 patrons currently at patreon.com. We want to thank each and every one of you.
Yeah, patreon.com/AVRantPodcast is the place to go to make your automatic monthly donation. So big thanks to our 138 patrons over there. That's holding steady. So there we go. 138 seems to be the magic number.
If you can't support us financially, we understand. But if you do something to support us, just let us know what it is. So Greg did that by letting us know that he reached out to AV Science and to let them know that we recommend them, particularly for projectors. So, which we do. We do that pretty constantly.
Yes, indeed.
So,
thank you, Greg. Thank you, Greg.
We also got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going through this ongoing and I think worsening again. Are we on the worsening side of things? It feels like I
think the hospital numbers have started ticking upwards. Yeah, so that would be worsening in my book.
Worsening pandemic. So stay safe out there. We're going to thank Curt, who offered to treat me to lunch sometime, which we're going to do. I got it's on the schedule.
Nice.
So provided everybody, at this point, everybody I know either has. Or not everybody I know. Many people I know either have or have just gotten over or have friends and family that have COVID right now. So nothing's set in stone until I actually leave the house to go to the thing. So Curt and I are supposed to have lunch. Aras says Aras thanks us. He also says great interview. Good to learn some more about soundproofing from the experts. Gurinder says we caught him off guard with our new earlier in the week releases. So you can thank one of our listeners who strong-armed us into it. And Kris, who says we are by far his favorite podcast, and thanks us for our effort every week. So Curt, Aras, Gurinder, Dazz, and Kris.
I think you missed Dazz going through the first time, but that's all right. We caught him on the second pass, and I'll say it again. Curt, Aras, Gurinder, Dazz, Kris, thank you all very much for sending us those notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going. We definitely appreciate the notes of encouragement, and a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
DJ Dazzy Dazz. I am gonna refresh my coffee eventually because this is not enough. In the news here, Monoprice's larger THX certified and smaller THX certified Monolith in-wall speaker models are now available to purchase. Okay, talked about this on AV Gadgets last week. In fact, right after the podcast last week, I did that. $700 each for the THX-465IW. Thank you very much. It's just they're just so good with the naming, except for this next one, which kind of
they kind of had to.
But yeah, so the 465IW uses 4 6.5-inch pulp fiber woofers, which are just paper.
That's right.
Fine. Everybody uses it, along with the exact same 1-inch Silk Dome tweeter and 2-inch Silk Dome mid-range stack as the THX 365 in wall and the THX LCR that were released earlier, which are both $400 each. Not surprisingly, the power handling's increased from 350 watts max to 450 for this new one. So it's bigger. It's THX Ultra certified rather than whatever the other things are. On the other end of things, the $350 each Monolith THX-275 in wall or IW drops down to a single 6.5-inch woofer and 300 watts max power handling, which also drops in THX Select rather than the Ultra. It retains the exact same tweeter plus mid-range stack. The whole point here from Monoprice is that now, depending on the size of your room, if you want in walls, on walls, or in rooms, they got it.
That's right.
And the in walls and the on walls, right? They all share the same
The in-walls and the in-rooms all share the same tweeter mid-range stack. And the reason that the 275 got called the 275, even though it's still a 6.5-inch woofer, is because there was already a 265 that existed in the lineup. The 265 does not have the mid-range driver. The 265 was the one that was meant to be more of like a satellite speaker replacement. So it's just the tweeter and then 2 of the woofers, but not the dedicated mid-range in the 265.
Right. So now they've got Ultra, they've got Select, they've got, you know, all this THX certifications you may want, and in the different speaker sizes and configurations you might want. Plus, of course, all the subwoofers are THX certified. So if you are looking to have a THX certified home theater, at least from the speaker perspective, they are a one-stop shop. You literally cannot say, I can't find the speaker I need for my room in here, because they have the size, the different certifications, the different sizes, the different install or in-room models. They've got everything you might need. It might not be the right shape or the size or looks, but it will definitely have all the stuff that, you know, they're just not going to be like, oh, well, I wanted an in-wall, and they don't have an in. They do. They do. So this is cool. This is very cool. And the prices aren't bad.
Yeah, quite reasonable.
I mean, the thing I really like about the 2 they just released, the in-walls they just released, is that depth and width wise, they are exactly the same. So if you said to yourself, I want this, I only need the THX Select, and then later on you went, wow, it's really not crossing over into my subs as well as I would like. I wish I had gotten the bigger one. You literally take that one out and then just cut the height bigger. A taller hole. Well, I mean, I think in order to keep the tweeter at the same level, you go up and down a little bit, but it would fit. It's not like you're like, oh, now I have to patch drywall or whatever. No, you don't have to do that. You just slap it right in there and it just cut that hole a little bit bigger. I mean, and these have got the dog ears. They're really easy to install. They don't have backer boxes.
They don't.
That's the only thing. Rob says, and I haven't been on there recently, so I don't know, but Rob says that Amazon Prime Video has finally updated their user interface. Well, it couldn't have gotten any worse.
That's about right.
I don't think I've hated it. The only thing I've hated more than Amazon Prime is the Peacock one, which is just so bad. Anyways, it looks a lot like Netflix with the big preview window at the top, a navigation menu on the side. There are 4 main tabs just below the big preview window to take the movies, TV shows, sports, or all. And thankfully, it's easy to tell if any given show is included with your Amazon Prime subscription, thanks to a blue check mark and the words included with Prime shown prominently whenever you highlight any show. The full rollout to all Amazon Prime Video users will take a couple of weeks. First up are, of course, Fire TV devices with their built-in smart TV partners, then Android TV, Google TV, Apple TV, along with Chromecast, Roku, PlayStation, Xbox soon after. Android mobile devices should get it soon, with iOS and web browsers bringing up the rear. Great, I guess, whatever. I'm just...
It just might make me not avoid Amazon Prime Video unless there's something I specifically want to watch on that service, because it was just a pain browsing or searching for anything on Amazon Prime Video.
It was. Well, you know what?
Now
you can find whatever you want on there. You just don't know. You don't know if it's free or not.
There was that.
Like, I don't know.
I mean, they got a little bit better at that because they had a whole free to me section based upon what type of thing you had. But it was just the interface was terrible before. It is definitely much improved. They did not reinvent the wheel whatsoever. It looks almost exactly like Netflix, but that's fine. It's a little bit more consistent and easier to use for sure.
So there's two interface oddities that bother me. The first and the most egregious was, of course, always Amazon Prime, where different seasons had different. Season 1 was its own thing, and then you had to go to season 2 for its own thing. That drove me absolutely bonkers. Now, I mean, once you started the season, it would go into the next one, no problem. But you may say, "Oh, I've always wanted to watch this." You click on it, you're like, "What is happening?" And you realize you're in season 3, the beginning of season 3.
Things are still listed that way under the new interface. It will still be listed as individual seasons, but at least you go into any given season and then there is a seasons tab to show you all the seasons of that show. Why there need to be individual multiple listings for each season to begin with, I have no idea. Just list the show.
Because they sell them.
Oh, I guess there's that.
Sell them.
I guess there's that. Yeah.
Yeah. They sell them by season.
They don't
so you
know
buy the
that
entire
you
season.
necessarily have a Prime subscription. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There you go.
But the other thing that drives me crazy is Netflix. And it's not with every show, but it should be earliest at the top. most recent at the bottom, right? I mean, that's you should go in there.
Playlist.
But that was the way the world worked before, like Ultimate Beast Master mode thing, whatever that show ended up being chronologically in reverse, or like the first most recent season was at the top.
Black Mirror is that way too, because they want the most recent thing to show up first. Yeah.
The British Bake Off is the same way. Yeah. So we watched the Ultimate Beast mode thing in completely wrong
reverse order. Nice.
Because we watched the most recent season first, and then it went down. I was like, what is happening? Why is this thing getting more primitive as we go along?
Yep.
Yeah, it drove me absolutely. Those are the things that, like, just keep it. Just do it right.
They got to tinker.
And then don't change it.
Got to bring in the new viewers.
Yeah. By the time you guys are hearing this podcast, even if it's on Thursday, I think that Netflix will have released their numbers and everybody will talk about how Netflix is dying. I don't know if Netflix is dying or not. All I know is if we have not learned by now that making a good movie is not just about throwing money at one person and letting them do whatever the heck they want, Netflix has proven it. Has proven that even the best movie makers that made some of your favorite movies, if you just throw money at them, they're gonna make a bad product. Because they don't have somebody going, "Are you sure about that?" Because that dragged on for like way too long.
Finding the correct balance.
Questions, Mike. Let's start with him. 2 weeks ago, Mike asked about using 4 small sealed subs since he wants the best experience possible in all 3 rows of seats in his 2,500 to 3,000 cubic foot theater. We guessed correctly. He is one of those guys. And he'll be doing the whole mini DSP and Room EQ Wizard thing and posting his pristine graphs all over the internet. Welcome to... Yeah, make sure when you post it to Reddit that you put the picture of your screen and you Photoshop it up like 5 feet just to mess with them. He says, Rhythmic mentions a thing where if you use a Y splitter to connect the subwoofer cable to both the left and right RCA inputs on the Rhythmic sub, they say you'll get something like a 6 dB more gain. Do all subs do that? How does that work? So yes, I actually talked about this on AV Gadgets because there is this thought that you should buy these they're called subwoofer cables. I mean, there's a lot of subwoofer cables out there, but there's a subwoofer cable that has a Y at one end.
I mean, it's just a really long Y splitter.
Yeah, it's all it is.
That's really all it is.
So it's the same basic thing. So I was like, why are these things out there? So I went and looked into it. So the idea here is that, yes, you will, in theory, get more gain by having 2 inputs getting the same voltage.
I mean, it depends on how it's internally wired. There is... Yeah, something there. So, I mean, on the one hand, if you just, like, let's say you have an AV receiver that just has a single subwoofer output, or you're only using a single subwoofer output on your AV receiver, by putting that through an RCA Y splitter cable of some sort, it will actually make each end, so you've taken the single and turned it into 2. Now, the signal on each of the 2 ends on the end of the splitter will be 3 dB quieter than if you had just left it alone and not split it. So you have weakened the individual signals. Now, the reason that a Rhythmic sub or other subwoofers that are internally wired in such a way that the left and right RCA inputs each have their own little gain circuit on them. So if each side has its own little 3 decibel gain circuit on it, that will result in like if you had just plugged both in and each side didn't have an individual 3 dB gain circuit, you would just get back to the original signal because it would combine the 2 sides which have each been reduced by 3 decibels by being split. It will put them back together and get you that 3 decibels of gain. If you have a 3 decibel gain on each side rather than just an individual gain stage after it's been recombined, then you'll get an additional 3 decibels of gain on top of that recombination. Each side will have been boosted by 3 dB to bring the split of each side back to 0. Now you're putting it back together and you'll get 3 decibels of gain. So because they've got individual gain on each one, you get a little bit. I'm not sure if it's actually 6. I think it's only 3.
It doesn't really matter because in the end,
you're going to end up turning the volume dial to whatever it needs to be. Yes.
Well, and there is this thought that you sometimes you hear people talk about subwoofer, clipping the output from the receiver if you turn the trim level up too high. First of all, I can't imagine a world where that's really a problem. But there is this thought, and if you were to artificially boost your trim levels on your or the output voltage on your subwoofer, if you did boost it by 6 dB, clearly Rhythmic is like, our amplifiers and our subwoofers, we can handle all that. We're not worried about that. But it is theoretically possible that if you did this, if you connected it this way, you could clip that input. Now, it's unlikely, but it is possible. The only time I'm ever worried about the output of your subwoofer from your receiver going into your actual subwoofer being too low is if you're using an auto-on circuitry and it's not being triggered because the voltage is too low. And you can fix that simply by turning the trim levels up and the subwoofer volume knob down slightly. So you can kind of adjust for that manually if you actually need to. To me, this is just like, buy another thing.
Well,
make you feel better about stuff.
If you're wondering why they did this, it's because Rhythmic, they do target themselves a little bit more at the 2-channel crowd. And so the reason they did it this way is because if you have an integrated stereo amp that has no dedicated subwoofer output, what you would be doing is taking a Y splitter from the front left pre-out and splitting that so that one half of that side goes to the left input of the subwoofer, and the other half of that split goes to the amplifier that will be powering your front left speaker, and then the same thing on the right side. So they did it this way because they're expecting that what might be coming into the subwoofer is a split signal from, say, the front left pre-out and the front right pre-out separately. Therefore, they put that 3 decibel gain stage on each input individually to get you back to the original signal. So it makes sense that it's wired that way when it's sort of targeted at the 2-channel crowd. And then if you take a dedicated subwoofer signal, put it into a Y splitter, put it into both ends, well, then both ends get boosted by 3 dB and then recombined. So it ends up 3 decibels louder than the original signal. I mean, that's all that's going on here. Like I say, the 3 decibels is not, I mean, you're just going to adjust the volume knob on the subwoofer. So, but that explains why it is that way, because it's targeted at the 2-channel crowd where they're expecting that you might be using a stereo integrated amp with no dedicated subwoofer output.
Right. So he asked, why are we so against painting home theaters black? Yes, he intends to paint his theater black. So what color do we prefer? We are not against painting it black.
That's right. I'm okay with black. Tom is against it.
Tom has painted many rooms, and Tom knows the joys of trying to paint over a dark blue paint.
Right.
And painting over a dark blue paint is a freaking nightmare, okay? It is absolutely awful. It takes so many coats and so much extra time and money, and it's just not worth it. So when you decide to go this route, which you're going to, and it's fine. I don't care what you do. It's your house. You can paint the whole thing. There's a house down the street from me that they painted the outside dark gray. And it just looks like the Munsters live there or something like that. I don't know what's going on in that house. But it's their house. I don't care what they do. It's just going to be a nightmare to repaint it something else, which is what you're going to have to do when you move. If you're like, I'm never moving, well,
or you're just willing to put in the effort that it takes to repaint it, or pay the price for the person who will come in and repaint it for you, which will cost a little bit extra than just repainting a room that was white or a light shade. They'll charge a bit extra because it will be more work and time. But where Tom and I will happily agree is that, let's say your significant other also doesn't want the room painted black, we will all agree on gray. So gray is the color that we like because it's very inoffensive. It still remains trendy at the moment, and it's really quite easy to all agree on gray. Now, we always talk about Sherwin-Williams, their SW707 series. We talk about the gray screen because that's an easy one to remember and an easy one to ask for, but that just gets you to the correct family. As you go through the darker and darker shades, they have names like online and network and software, web gray, and cyberspace, so you can sort of see the theme that they were going for. Now, if you get all the way down to the end of that, you end up at their tricorn black, which is their completely neutral black, and that might be the color that you go for to have your completely blacked out home theater. So those are the ones that we like. Those are all neutral. We like them because if you are putting a projector in that room, it will not result in any sort of color tint ending up on your screen from reflected light off of colored walls of any type. It's a completely neutral gray, and you'll just get back what was reflected originally.
Right. And if you go on Reddit and you get people giving you suggestions, they'll say, I got this and it looks less green to my eyes, and I got this and it looks less blue to my eyes. I'm like, no one cares about your eyes there, Chad. We've got colorimeters for that. So,
but I looked at two TVs side by side on YouTube and I picked the winner.
So, this is a neutral color. This is not a neutral color because we think it's a neutral color. It's a neutral color because it is a neutral color, and that's why we recommend it. Yeah. It's not I bought it and I want you to buy it so that we can both agree that it's awesome and I can feel better about my purchase. I don't care if you buy it. In fact, I prefer if you didn't. So
it's just a safe choice. It's a safe choice with an easy to remember name. If you're gonna
do something, do it right. That's all. He says we're clearly fans of Silver Ticket's fixed frame white screens, but what about their woven acoustically transparent screens? Do we recommend those too? Generally speaking, we do not. Not because of the fact that we're like, oh, we got to spread the love around. We recommend the screens that are best performing for the least price. Okay,
yes.
That is the sole motivator for why we recommend it, which is why the words out of our mouths for about 10 years on subwoofers was buy SVS, because SVS was consistently the cheapest.
We had HSU in there too, because we did.
You're right. The STF, whatever it was,
STF2 loved that sub.
Was a great sub for people who are like, I am on a serious budget, and if I don't hit 20 hertz, I'm going to be okay with that. Then that was the sub we would steer them towards. And now you're starting to hear us say monoprice more because their new subwoofers are undercutting SVS subs. But we say, but get some friends, because these things are insanely heavy, and you do not understand how heavy they are until you try to move it. So
I would also be trumpeting the RSL Speedwoofer even more than I do. I do recommend it, but I trumpet it a lot more if you could buy the darn thing. If it ever remained in stock for any period of time, I would be trumpeting that thing much more loudly.
Yeah, that is true. I would agree with that. So why do we recommend Elite screens over Silver Ticket, and then Seymour AV as well for acoustically transparent? Because price to performance ratio is better over there.
Yeah, I do want to warn, once again, as I always do with the Elite screens, the only acoustically transparent woven screen that I like from them is their Acoustic Pro UHD. I do not like the Acoustic Pro 1080, and they have like 3 different versions of that one. I'm not a fan of that one, but the UHD is pretty darn good at a very affordable price, and Elite Screens has very affordable frames that go along with it. The Silver Ticket woven acoustically transparent screens that they sell, now they're not terrible. If you got one, I'm not telling you, oh, you must return it because it's horrible. It's not that. It's just the price versus the Elite Acoustic Pro UHD, it's about a wash. There's not really much different. It depends on which frame you get, of course, but the price difference that is normally there, where Silver Ticket has a big advantage in just their fixed frame white screen, that doesn't exist as much with their woven acoustically transparent. And then it's a little bit more typical of what we sort of remember from woven acoustically transparent screens, which is you need to be 12 feet or more away before you're not going to see that weave. It lets a not insignificant amount of light leak through, so you kind of want to have a black backing of some sort for sure, and it will, dim your image. So like I say, it's not bad, but it's just, I would call it kind of typical, and I would like to recommend something that I say, oh, this is above average. This is better than typical, if such a thing exists. And I think the Elite Screens Acoustic Pro UHD just kind of gets there. Its weave is that little bit finer, the amount of light that penetrates through is that little bit less, and then the price is about a wash. It has a little bit of color shift to it, so that's where we're saying if you want the very best performance, you're going to spend more and go to Seymour AV. So that's sort of the balancing act there. And yeah, so if you already have the Silver Ticket, don't worry. We're not going to tell you wasted your money or something like that, but it's not our #1 choice for acoustically transparent.
And if you got it on sale somehow,
or,
people on the Facebook Marketplace or something, I mean, clearly, this is not... Again, it's all about price to performance, and it's usually MSRP is what we're looking at here. We're not saying one thing or another. I mean, Seymour AV is, you can certainly they're more expensive. You can certainly find more expensive
Oh,
acoustically
much more than
transparent
them.
screens, I bet.
And if you're willing to make your own frame, they'll sell you the material just by itself without a frame, which takes the cost way, way down.
Way down, yeah. Dazz. Dazz has had his Ascend CMT340 SE speakers on their pedestal stands on either side of his projection screen. He wanted to upgrade to his SB2000 subs for a long time, but in order to physically fit much larger ported subs, he wants to free up space beneath his front, left, and right speakers. So he had intended to make shelves attached to the front wall, but factoring material costs in his time, he could just use the BTEC BT77 side clamping wall mounts. Could he asks instead. They say they're rated for 55 pounds each, and those CMT speakers weigh at 26 pounds. The Video Secu side clamping mounts that we often mention say they're rated for 33 pounds, so that seems like it might be cutting it a bit close compared. What do we say? I say if 33 is greater than 26...
I know, but they're always a little bit... This is one where usually the specs are a little bit more optimistic. It's like, yeah, if it's installed perfectly, I mean, I guess they would have to, otherwise there'd be lawsuits on their hands. But, I mean, I certainly have no problem with those BTECs. They are also available, the very same look and rating from Mount It. So the BTECs, I have seen listed as discontinued at places like BH Photo. So there is the mounted version, which is also rated for 55 pounds and actually comes in at a lower price point than the BTEX. So the mounted option is definitely something that you could look at there. I have no problem with it other than the CMT340 SE, when it's set up vertically, is a quite tall speaker, right? It's a woofer, tweeter woofer arranged vertically. It's a sizable speaker. It's a beefy boy. So, you would probably want to actually use that screw hole that's in that BTEC or in the mounted version, and maybe actually screw right into the side of the cabinet itself a little bit.
Oh, on the side clamps?
Yeah, on the side clamps, there's a little hole there. You'd go through the little bit of padding, and it would actually go right into the MDF cabinet. I know that, like, that makes me squinch up my face because I'm like, ugh, you're for sure marring the finish. But if you want a very secure attachment there, particularly if you're going to use any tilt or anything on that wall mount, just because it's such a tall speaker when it's set vertically, I have a little bit of misgiving there. So I'm not completely over the moon about wall mounting the CMT340, but if you are going to do it, then this would be a very appropriate wall mount to use. And like I say, there's the mounted exact same thing, just from a different company.
Yeah, it's funny. You're like, oh, I'll just build a shelf, just get some plywood, blah, blah. And you're like, yeah, then you have to paint it, then you have to prime it, and you should have sanded it, even though I didn't.
And just the cost of the wood these days to begin with, particularly if you want, like, nice looking finished wood.
Yeah. He says, is there a thin bezel fixed frame projection screen that we like? We just suggested one last week, right? From Silver Ticket.
Now we're doing Silver Ticket. Yeah, that's exactly it. So I mean, he is just going for fixed frame white material. We love Silver Ticket for that, and their thin bezel version is less expensive than everybody else's. Now it's quite a bit more expensive than their regular fixed frame. So you're going to be looking at paying probably about $300 to $400 more just to get that thin bezel. But it's still the best one out there. So it's going to be a question of, is the thin bezel and the little bit of room that it saves you versus the normal 2.5-inch frame worth about $300 to $400 more?
Okay. I know I have someplace in here someplace where the mounts, but I can't find it. Yeah. All right. Blah, 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 blah. He's been leaning towards a pair of HSU VTF3 Mark V HP subs this whole time, but inflation has caught up with HSU as well, and now they're about $1,100 each after shipping is included. So he's been cross-shopping the Monolith 13-inch THX, Power Sound Audio TV 1512, and SVS PB3000, all of which normally go for $1,600 to $1,700, but there are sales sometimes. He'd like to keep the price under $1,500, so is there anything else we'd recommend more highly? I don't remember his room being this big.
Oh, his room's pretty big. Yeah, his room's
What
pretty
is
big.
it?
Yeah, because it's the T-shaped basement. It's open to other parts. So he's upwards of around 4,000 cubic feet once it's all totaled in there.
Well, the HSU will definitely crush that thing.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. I mean, they are still the least expensive. That VTF3 Mark V HP, or even if you went up to the what I'm forgetting the name of the thing now. The larger model, the VTF 15 Mark II. I'm forgetting the name of the thing. It slipped out of my mind. But regardless, the HSUs are still the least expensive. Here, again, because it is on sale at the time that we're recording this, the monoprice Monolith M15 V2 normally goes for $1,500 and then is on sale at the time we're recording this for $1,200, and that's shipping included. So that's only $100 more than the HSU. That Monolith M15 V2, if you're comparing it to SVS's lineup, it has the same output as a PB4000 at a considerably lower price. Doesn't come with the app, doesn't look as nice on the outside, but price to performance, really, really hard to beat that M15 V2. Now, I did sort of look at the specs of all the ones that he mentioned, and the M15 V2 is a bit taller. And I'm thinking that maybe that's the reason.
That probably makes the difference right there.
It's probably why he mentioned that Monolith 13, because the Monolith 13 THX Ultra, that whole thing, it doesn't make a ton of sense to me because the M15 V2 actually slightly outperforms it for $100 less at the normal price. And I'm like, why do they have that one in the lineup? But if it is about the matter of the height, I will just say there's nothing stopping you from taking the M15 V2 and putting it on its side.
Right.
And then it's not as tall as the Monolith 13-inch, which is almost exactly a cube, so you don't really save anything by turning that one on its side, whereas the M15 V2 you do. So that's the one I would point you to if you don't go with the HSU, but I don't really see any reason to not go with the HSU. It's still the least expensive option and does have sufficient output for your room size.
And I can't stress that enough. If the key to buying subwoofers is get the right one to pressurize your room for the least amount of money possible. Like spending more money to get more pressurization doesn't actually get you more anything. It's nothing. So yes, I would just go with it. Like when everything else is more expensive than the HSU, why are you looking at them? You don't need them because the HSU certainly is going to get you down to 20 hertz, no problem. So since his room is basically T-shaped and has some odd angles, how does he actually go about finding the best placement for two subs based on measurements? You don't.
Well, with exceeding tedium, that would be the answer, unfortunately.
With his pair of SB2000 subs, one at the front of the room, one at the back, he tried adjusting phase on the subs and distances on his Denon X4400H, and he took a bunch of measurements, but they all seem kind of meh. So once he has his monster subs, how does he determine the best placement in his irregularly shaped room? Well, first of all, changing the distance and changing the phase is like the same thing. So don't do that. You just pick one and go with it. Right. You're just doing it in two different ways. So leave the phase leave the distance wherever Odyssey sets it, and then start changing the phase on each individual sub itself. This is where spending the extra money on something like the SVS suddenly starts making a lot of sense, because you can sit there in your chair
and you've got the app and just do it from your seat.
You got the app. Yeah. So again, we're going for price to performance ratio, and if you just look at the price to performance, it makes most sense to go with the HSU, and I would 100% be behind that. But when you say, but also I need this, you're like, okay, well, now your performance, you've actually changed your performance metrics. What you are looking for is not just a sub that gets the lowest and loudest for the least amount of money. I need the lowest and loudest for the least amount of money. That's not going to make me want to kill myself at the end of the day, which is what getting up and going back and forth to the back of your sub, and
particularly if you with actually do it 3 degrees at a time, which would be the ideal. So I mean, but he's not even so much even getting to the adjusting of the phase side of it. He's just like, how do I find out the best placement? Because in a rectangular room, we can tell you what the best placement is going to be. In an irregularly shaped room, we don't know ahead of time.
Well, you hire one of those JBL synthesis guys, and they come in there with
Arcos,
like 7,000 microphones, and they take crazy amounts of measurements, and they're like, put one there, and put one there, and everything will be perfect. And then do these EQ things to them, and it'll be great. You can't do that. I mean, you can, but if you could do that, you wouldn't be talking to us about how much the subwoofers cost. Because this will cost you a lot more than the subwoofer as well.
I don't really have a great answer that doesn't involve tedium if you're truly looking for the optimized positioning of the two subs. But what I want to stress is that people get very easily and understandably confused about what they're even looking for in the measurements that they're taking. Because when it comes to, I'm trying to optimize just the placement of my two subwoofers, what you're trying to find there has nothing to do with linearity, and it has nothing to do with just the prime seat. What you need to do is measure in each seat for unfortunately, each combination of positioning, and then you're trying to find the best uniformity, not the best linearity, the best uniformity across all of the seats that you care about. Now, as you can imagine, if you're measuring in every seat that you care about, every time you move one or both of the subs, that's where we run into a tremendous amount of tedium. And unfortunately, even something like the multi-sub optimizer software can't really help you at that stage, because the multi-sub optimizer software can come in and reduce some of the tedium you're facing when it comes to adjusting the phase, gain, and EQ of each sub individually, but it doesn't tell you really anything about the positioning. It's just going to take whatever positioning you gave it and work the best it can with the measurements across multiple seats, but that's assuming the subs aren't going to move. It doesn't tell you, oh, you could get even better results if you moved one of these subs. It doesn't have that type of ability to tell you something like that. So when we're saying, where should I actually put my two subs, the best starting point we can get you remains take whatever two parallel surfaces you have and put the subs in the middle of those two parallel surfaces on opposite sides of the room. Mathematically speaking, that is for sure going to get rid of one room mode, the room mode that is exactly the distance between those two parallel surfaces. By having the two subs in the middle of those two parallel surfaces across the room from each other, you've eliminated that one mode for sure. Mathematically, that's going to happen. But the rest of the wave pattern, we can't really predict, unfortunately. So that's the only answer I can give. It's the truthful answer. I still think you're better off starting with the two subs at the midpoints of whatever two parallel walls that you have. Then you're going to measure in all of your seats, see how good or bad the uniformity is. Use the 12-step guide method of just relying on your ears, sitting in each of the seats, and slowly adjusting the phase of whichever subwoofer is farthest away from you. Is that right? I'm forgetting now. Is it closest or farthest?
Farthest is what you said in your thing.
Yeah, that works out. So adjusting that one, which again would mean getting up and going to the farthest sub and changing it a little bit at a time and trying to achieve the best uniformity that you can. If you then discover that with those positions, there's nothing you can do to get uniform results in all the seats that you care about, then unfortunately we just have to do some trial and error of repositioning the subs. I have seen the recommendation of basically you take one sub, you put it like somewhere at the front of the room where it could reasonably live, and measuring just at the main listing position and seeing what the graph looks like, and then taking the second sub, not playing the first sub anymore, only measuring the second sub, and trying to find a position that is somewhat like an inverse of the measurement that you got of the first sub. But I'm here to tell you that isn't necessarily going to work, because you might find that when you move to the seat to the left or move to the seat to the right, that even though it got you a more linear result at the primary seat, it gave you a worse result in the seat to the left or a worse result in the seat to the right. That's why I'm saying the key thing we're looking for in the positioning is uniformity. And I don't know of a great way to do that in an irregularly shaped room other than trial and error and tedium, unfortunately.
Yeah, there is no calculator that has been created.
Yeah, I mean, like in Room EQ Wizard, there's the room simulator, but it's a rectangle. It's a rectangular room because that's what you can simulate.
There's no online room mode calculator or room-based calculator where you can say you can actually put in the exact dimensions of your room, you know, with all the cutouts and all the jutouts and all the, you know, the T's and the L's and the O's and everything else that might be in there, and come up with this is where you should put your subs to start with. Yeah. There is nothing like that. It is only with rectangular rooms, and it's only because it's so predictable. Right. Will we someday have something like that? I mean, quantum computing is around the corner. Yeah. I mean, this is. I mean, I literally think
it actually
would
work very well for this because that's every possible result instantaneously together with the most probable good result spit out at you. So yeah, quantum computing that'll save us.
So you know, if you were to try to simplify this process as much as you could. And I'm not even saying this would work because I've never used Room EQ Wizard. Oh, I mean, I have, but I haven't used it in a really, really long time.
Yeah, not extensively.
But you would need multiple microphones, mix and probably some sort of outboard DAC so that you could have every single microphone going into its own channel, and then basically you would want to measure in real time all the channels at the same time and overlay them on the graph.
We had a listener who had the proposal of, he's like, I've got an iPad, I've got a phone, I've got my computer. Could I get the Dayton mics that plug into the iPad and the iPhone, put up an FFT so that I'm just seeing it in real time, and just move things around until all of the graphs look as uniform as I can get them? Yes, that is the cheap man's Arcos. That's the poor man's version of Arcos to do it that way. And you know what? I'm all for it because that isn't the full optimization yet. That's just trying to get the positioning of the two darn subwoofers to not make things worse. That's really what we're looking for, is just not making it worse.
The reality is you're only going to have a limited number of places that you can reasonably put these subs. Yeah. That is the reality. Yeah. Everything else that's going on, you're like, I've got a T-shape this and blah, blah, blah. I can put them anywhere I want. No, you can't. There's doors and stairs and, furniture and, people are going to be sitting there and and I just don't want it right there. I don't want to see it, or I don't want it to be in the way and somebody's going to hit it or something like that. So there's going to be a limited number of places that you can do it. So setting up something like what Rob just said, or I just said, where you have multiple microphones all doing this, the graphing at the same time so that you can kind of move the sub around. And, sometimes inches make a difference. Sometimes they, feet don't. It doesn't really, you never really know. So you need to keep, adjusting them. And then once you get them where you're like, well, this is where they're going to live. This is as good as the graphs have looked.
Once you see some pretty good uniformity from seat to seat, don't go for perfection. We're not looking for perfection. We're just like, hey, now the ups and the downs in the graph, they're pretty close to the same frequency in every seat. It's not a perfectly overlapping line, but it's at least it's not up in this seat and down in the other seat at the very same frequency. That's what we're trying to get away from.
I guess we should define uniformity too, right? So uniformity in this case is not overlapping lines. It is when one goes up, the other ones go up. When one goes down, the other ones go down. It isn't that they all go down at the same amount, or even that. I mean,
ideally it would be, right? Ideally it would be the same graph in every seat. That's the ideal for uniformity. But realistically, what we're trying to achieve is, let's say there's a hump at 45 hertz in your primary seat. Well, we want a hump at 45 hertz in every seat. That's what we're looking for at this stage. If there's a dip at 60 hertz in the main seat, we want a dip at 60 hertz in every seat, so that your equalizer can then come along, and when it boosts 60 hertz and trims 45 hertz, that works for every seat. That's the uniformity we're trying to achieve.
All right. Is that the end of him?
That's
the end of him. Okay. Ilango and his family, I'm sorry, not his entire family. I guess it's probably his entire family, but I just put that word in there. Ilango and his family are entering into a top-to-bottom full renovation of their whole house. Eventually, he hopes to have a fully dedicated theater in the basement, but the rest of the house comes first, so the dedicated theater is on the back burner for now. They still want a space for family movie nights, so they intend to use the family room. The room itself has dimensions of 15 by 17 by 8, but has 2 large openings and blah, blah, blah. The openings to the back of the house, at the back to the house entrance and the stairs has a French door, but the large opening on the left into the dining room has no doors, and then the dining room is open to the kitchen, which is open to other parts of the house, so infinity. Infinity space. Directly above the family room is a master bedroom. They'll be redoing all the ceilings anyway, and he tends to have insulation added in the ceiling joists between the floors, but would doing double drywall with green glue on the ceiling of the family room help at all? If you listen to our last podcast.
We couldn't have come at a better time. We asked this question specifically, basically. Yeah.
He knows sounds will escape and make its way to the master bedroom via other paths, but would there be any noticeable difference at all by beefing up the ceiling between the two rooms? Will there be any noticeable difference? Maybe a little bit, but
I mean, I would say almost certainly some.
Right, but would it be enough? Would it be now I can sleep versus before I could not? The answer is no. The real solution here is to not try so hard to continue to have a home theater. And I say this lovingly, okay? I say this as somebody who's done this. Just live with it being awful for a while, so that when you go back to having a theater, you're like, this is why we have done this.
Right.
This is it. This is the reason why I put all this money and effort into this room, is because remember how bad it was? I mean, we couldn't understand that, we had to have subtitles all the time and stuff like that. Get yourself a couple of, if you really want to spend, go get yourself a couple of KEF powered speakers and plug them into your TV and call it good. You know what I mean? Just do the minimum so that it is something you can watch and not kill yourself. That was what I would do. Yeah, because everything else is just going to be, you're going to constantly push for more and better sound, which is just going to make everything, it's just going to cause way too many problems in my estimation. Yeah,
this particular one, it is sort of the most challenging one to answer, and it's why I asked it of Jason Ehrlich specifically, because it isn't the case where we're going to say, oh, you put the second layer of drywall with the green glue on the ceiling and it does nothing. If that were the case, it would be easy to just say, nope, never do it, completely not worth it. It does something, but it's definitely not soundproof. And I mean, if you have an HVAC path directly between the floors, that's just going to go straight through. That's a hole. Whatever it sounded like before, it still sounds exactly like that. And the rest of the ceiling being more soundproof than it was before makes no difference to the amount of sound that got through the HVAC path, unless you completely change all the HVAC too. Like he's saying, they're redoing all the ceilings anyway, so if the cost isn't a big concern to you, beefing up that ceiling, it like we're saying, it's not going to be a zero, but it also, like, if you weren't redoing the ceilings anyway, I would say just don't do it.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that.
But since you're redoing the ceilings anyway, then I'm kind of like, well, how much do you care about that money? Because if Ilango is quite well off and it's really not that much to put the 2 layers of drywall instead of 1 new layer of drywall, then I'm like, yeah, you're getting a little bit of something out of it. I don't think you're getting
glue is going to make that much. I mean, it makes a difference, but I would just say the added mass would be more important. Like even just saying,
honestly, getting the drywall separated from the joists would make a bigger difference.
Right, sure.
Having some kind of joist hangers. Now that's going to be like probably sound clips and hat channels, or like you don't need the whole spring-loaded system that we talked about with Jason. You definitely don't need that. But like the sound clips and hat channels separator, doing that would actually do more than attaching 2 layers of drywall directly to the joists.
So you look at it, you're like, it doesn't cost that much more to get these things to, the hat channels and the sound clips. Maybe it adds 30% to the price, right? Just to get that, and you're like, oh, 30% is not that much, but it's not just that. It's also now you have to have installers who are experienced and do it right.
Although sound clips and hat channels is kind of hard to screw up, but it can be done. It can be screwed up.
It can be. So, I mean, then you're adding another layer of complexity versus just saying, put nothing. Okay, 2 layers of drywall, great. 2 layers of 1/2 inch, or maybe just use 3/4 inch. And then, okay, it's not quite the same, but you're just putting more mass up there. Because eventually you're going to have a basement, right? Which may or may not be it's certainly not going to be a room within a room, because we talked with Jason about how expensive that can get very quickly if you do it the whole thing right. I mean, I told my wife about the $6,000 door.
Yeah.
She was like, it's like, I want one of those doors, and he told me it was $6,000, and I was like, oh, I'm never getting one of those doors. So this is it can get really expensive. So if later on you're going to have a basement theater, and you're like, well, this is my bedroom, I'm just going to put around my bedroom, extra layers of drywall or thicker drywall, just to add another layer of just more masts, so that the sound has a harder time getting through, and I'm going to insulate as well. I will warn you about insulation, like inside of a house. Like outside of a house, you absolutely should be insulated, and I think people in Europe are learning that as we speak, unfortunately. But inside of a house, when you generally don't have insulated walls, and that is, I know that my theater in particular, because I did insulate all the walls in here to keep sound transmission, to deaden as much
just
as I
about,
could.
as Jason said as well, and we totally agree, the cheapest insulation goes inside the walls, because it's not about thermals, it's just about stopping that cavity from being the inside of a drum. That's all. It's stuffing. It's speaker stuffing.
So doing stuff like that, I mean, but it does, make heating and cooling this room a little bit more difficult, because it tends to retain whatever's in here. Yeah, and it makes it harder. So, while other rooms in the house cool down faster, this one does not. Or the other, rooms in the house warm up faster, this one does not, because there is insulation. So it's just something to consider. Greg says, what's the safest, smartest way to sell a bunch of home theater gear? Greg and his significant other will be downsizing, moving from their house of 34 years into an apartment, since they want to do a lot more traveling and no longer want the upkeep of a house, nor the worry if they are away for long periods of time. He's got 6 TVs in the current house, plus a JVC RS520 projector in use, and a few other displays in storage. Wow. It's like Rob.
It is.
He's got multiple surround sound systems using RBH EMP Tech, SVS, ELAC, and Polk speakers, as well as Sonos and Denon soundbars. His main setup with his JVC projector is a 5.4.4 configuration. He held onto one LG 3D plasma TV with about 10 3D movies and a 3D Blu-ray player. Those can finally all go now. Rob will buy them.
Probably not. I probably own them. I think I have every 3D movie that existed.
He isn't looking forward to having attached neighbors above and to one side. He enjoys watching movies at full reference volume, and his internet service and cable provider will probably be a downgrade too. But as far as selling off the equipment he'll no longer be using, what do we suggest? He isn't on Facebook, though he's willing to consider it, since he's heard that Facebook Marketplace might be one of the better ways. He's used Craigslist in the past, and it was really not a fan of that. So should he sign up for Facebook, or is there something else we recommend? Now, Rob's got a whole... I can list you all of his lists, okay? These are all DIY, like you're going to sell it. Okay?
Yes. I mean, these are akin to Craigslist, but just more home theater specific than Craigslist.
But before you go with that, I'm going to say, with this amount of gear and this amount of things you're going to sell, the number one way to go, in my opinion, is to have somebody else do it for you.
Consignment?
And not consignment. Well, there is consignment, but there are lots of services out there that will post things online for eBay and everything. You just bring it all into them. You don't have to bring boxes or anything. You bring it all in. They take pictures of it. They post it online. They do all the marketing for it, and they sell it, and you get a percentage. Now, they're going to take like maybe 20, 30, 40%. I don't know. They take some percentage of it depending on how much it costs to sell and everything else. And some of it they may not want because of how little it'll sell for. And those you can, in my case, I would just give them away or donate them. But in your case, you may want to go to do one of the things that Rob's saying. But with all of these items, it is a lot more work than you think it is. And having... Facebook Marketplace is a good place, because that is where people are right now. A lot of people are using Facebook Marketplace, but it is very, very local. There are listings that you will get, because I look on it a lot for bike stuff. Not that I'm buying any of it, but I just want to see if there is anything, there's specific things I'm looking for my bike that I wouldn't mind having, which is a new saddle and some carbon rim wheels. But I don't have the money for it, so I'm not going to buy it anyways. But I see it, and I do see stuff that's like out of state and there's shipping and stuff like that. But you can specify all that, and then it's just a matter of, you know, either deciding to meet somebody someplace or having them come to your house and look at it and then go with it. I would just do this sort of consignment sort of thing where you go and you're like, you know, you guys sell stuff on eBay, you guys sell stuff on Facebook or whatever you do. Here's all my stuff, sell it for me, and I'll take whatever percentage you get. And I think as far as how much your time is worth is literally going to determine this, and how much aggravation this is. My wife the other day was trying to sew some patches on my son's Boy Scout sash, and she's terrible at sewing, and I'm even worse. And she's like, this is terrible. I'm like, we can take it down to the local seamstress. They'll probably do it for $10-20. She goes, oh. I'm like, it's how much is your time worth, and how much aggravation, you know, how much is the aggravation worth to you? Because you're definitely aggravated. She's like, well, I got nothing going on today, so I'm just going to do it. That's how you kind of determine whether or not you're going to use one of these services.
So the ones I'm going to mention, like Tom said, they're just like Craigslist, except the audience is targeted at home theater gear. So Audiogon is probably the largest one that I would point you to. I really do highly recommend them, but yes, it is you putting the listing up, you taking care of all the sale one-on-one, but Audiogon is a great place to go. There's also US Audio Mart, which is very similar. They're actually the US offshoot of Canuck Audio Mart up in Canada. Canuck Audio Mart is almost certainly the place to go if you are in Canada, and then they have US Audio Mart as their United States version of that. So those two are the specialized places to go. There are then the classified sections of AVS Forum, the largest home theater forum, of course, AVS Forum, and they have a classified section, and also AV Science that we have, of course, talked about. They have their own forums and their own classified section too. So those are the places that I would point you to if you want to do it as a sale of your own and one-on-one sale. Similar to Craigslist, but with a much more curated audience that would be looking there specifically for home theater equipment. So Tom has run off to get some more coffee, so I will start in with Amelia's question. Amelia is building a dedicated home theater. The dimensions will be 17 feet long, 14 feet wide, and 11 feet high. So the total air volume will be just over 2,600 cubic feet. The plan is to have a false wall with an acoustically transparent projection screen, and given the limited dimensions, she'd like to keep the depth of that false wall to a minimum. She would ideally like to have 4 subwoofers based on Todd Welty's research, but starting with just 2 is definitely a possibility. So she was planning on using in-wall subwoofers, wasn't planning on using in-wall subwoofers, but something that is low profile is going to be needed so that the space of the false wall is kept to a minimum. Since all the gear will be going in an equipment rack, and at least 1 or 2 of the subwoofers, depending on if 2 or 4 total, will be going behind the false wall, where access is going to be limited and difficult, she was thinking that passive subwoofers might be a good idea. That way, the subwoofer amplification could go in the gear rack, and she'd only need to run speaker wire from the gear rack to the subwoofer locations, rather than having to worry about a power cable, RCA cables, which she mentioned she was a little concerned might pick up some noise, and a 12-volt trigger wire, she was thinking, so that she would have control over the power on-off state, plus needing access in order to do all the setup and changes. But in searching for physically thin, passive subwoofers, she really only found Triads, their Silver Series on-wall subwoofer, but it's expensive at about $3,000 each, and it's just a 12-inch woofer with an external 500-watt amplifier, nothing particularly special to justify that $3,000 price point, and they don't publish any performance specs, so we don't even know if it's got really good 20 hertz output. So I'll let Tom ask the actual questions that Amelia posed to us.
I'm just scrolling through her question here. Why did that not take as long as I thought? Because
I just listed them. There was nothing much to say.
Oh my God, I thought you were going to go on and on. You usually do. I just wanted to get some more coffee.
I'm trying to get through these questions. We're not going to get through 10 more, that's for sure.
That's all right. She asked, can we suggest any subwoofers that will be less than 15 inches deep and check all of the other boxes she's mentioned? Now, her room is only 2,600 cubic feet, so it's not small, but it's not huge.
Yeah, it's on the sort of low side of medium, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, to be honest. So, a lot of these concerns that she has are understandable.
Very much so.
But I would say
I think we can allay them.
Yeah, I was going to say these are not things you. I can understand why you might worry about them, but we can tell you that you don't need to. So she wants going behind a false wall. Okay, that's not a problem.
Yeah, 15 inches would be sort of the max. So right away, I was like SB2000 Pros from SVS. The SVS SB2000 Pros, basically 14.5-inch cubes. They're 14.6 inches high, 14.2 inches wide, and 14.6 inches deep if you don't put the grill on. And of course, if it's going behind a false wall, you don't need to have the grill on. But you also, if it's really squishy and like half an inch is all it's going to take, you could turn it sideways. There's absolutely no reason that the drivers can't fire sideways pointed in at each other, or even pointed towards the outside walls, as long as there's a little bit of distance. So that gets you physically the size. The other concerns, I mean, this is going in an existing room, so there's going to be a power outlet on that front wall somewhere. So we only
probably
need
multiples.
We only need 2 plugs for the 2 subs. If you end up with 4 subs total, and meaning 2 subs end up behind the false wall, so I'm not worried about the power cable situation. The RCA cables, I mean, if you have any concerns, just get them from Blue Jeans. Get them from Blue Jeans, which are literally broadcast quality. Right. All the shielding you could ever hope for, and noise is not a problem if you use Blue Jeans cable, RCA cables, and it's only going to be a couple of them, so I'm not worried that the price is a little bit higher than just getting them from Monoprice or Amazon, which honestly, the Monoprice or Amazon ones would be totally fine, but if it worries you at all, go ahead and get the broadcast quality Belden RCA cables from Blue Jeans cable. And then for the power state, being the SVS ones, you have the app control, which also mitigates your concerns about the setup part of it, having them hidden behind the false wall and worrying about accessing the controls. You get to do it all through the SVS app by getting these subwoofers, and you can control the power state that way without having to run a 12-volt cable. So I think this checks all the boxes that you need without resorting to in-wall subwoofers or overly priced on-wall subwoofers that we don't even know the performance from. And 4 of the SB2000 Pros in 2,600 cubic feet is going to give you the reference level 20 hertz output that you might be after. So I think it checks all the boxes.
For $600 more than one of those other subs.
That's right.
That's not even with a discount.
That's getting 4 of them.
So they're what? They're $1,699 for 2. So $1,700 for 2. So $3,400, $400 more than one of the.
That's right. That'll be better.
That would be for 4.
That's right.
Full subwoofer. So hopefully that's saving you enough money. She says if she goes with powered subs behind false wall, does she need to be concerned about heat? And what about turning the subwoofers on and off, preferably without having to run even more wires for 12-volt control? Again, you've got the app for control, but you've also got the auto on.
There's the auto on feature too. Yeah,
you can play with. Subwoofers in general are powered by Class D amplification. That is just sort of the de facto standard. The problems with Class D amplification don't really occur in the bass frequencies.
Not at all.
It's very easy to make a very linear Class D amp that goes from 10 hertz up to 200 hertz. That is everything that your subwoofer will ever play ever, and it'll be strikingly linear. And Class D amplification is extremely efficient, which means that 90+% of the power that goes into it.
I've never noticed heat coming off of my SVS subs. That's never been never been a concern. Also, it's a false wall. Air can still move in and out.
Right.
So it's not as though you've put this behind a solid structure where there's no way for the air to circulate. The air can still circulate. It's a false wall.
I would wrap. If you said I'm gonna mummy wrap my SVS subs with acoustically transparent cloth, I would not worry about that cloth ever.
Right.
Getting hot, much less catching on fire. And if you are concerned, you're like, I don't believe these guys. They don't know what the heck they're talking about. Buy the 4 subs we talked about. SVS will take them all 4 of them back if you want.
And pay the shipping both ways. 0 risk.
Pay the shipping both ways, so you're good both ways. Then go and play a movie, and then halfway through or at the end of the movie, go to the subs in the back, which are not behind the false wall. Put your hand on the amplifier and tell us how hot it is, because you will have that ability, and they'll be in the room, and you'll be able to see them, and you'll see that they are not very. And you don't need 12-volt control because
either auto on or using the app.
Or you can do what I do and just turn them on and leave them on forever.
There's that
because
too.
they don't. The power draw is not that big. So does the room size indicate that only 2 subs will be needed, or will 4 subs still be better?
How big's your seating area? That's
yes. We talked about this, was it last week? A bit, and it comes down to a number of seats that you want to actually be better. So if it's just you, or just you and maybe one other person who's sitting right next to you, 2 subs will be more than fine. 4 subs would just make it so that more people in the room will also have the same base. And that being said, it's not like 2 subs aren't giving a more even bass experience for every seat in the room. They are. It's getting better every time, as you double the number of subs.
No, the gap from 1 to 2, a very large difference. The gap from 2 to 4 subs, there's an improvement to be had if you have a substantially large seating area, like relative to the size of your room, but it's a much smaller step than going from 1 to 2. So 2 is where tremendous value. We can't suggest it strongly enough. 4 is like, well, if in this room, I can't imagine it would be more than 2 rows of seats in this size of room. But if you really, really care that both rows of seats, if you even have 2 rows of seets, if you
I'm going to
really,
tell you,
really
if that
care.
Second row is on the back wall,
I know.
you better stop caring about it,
Yeah.
because you're going to need a lot of subs to make that back that
But
sub
honestly,
on the back wall. I mean, row on the back wall.
We don't want to necessarily say send subs back to SVS, but I mean, you can order 4, try it out, try it with 2, try it with 4, and if you're like, you know what, the 4 isn't making a worthwhile difference, you send 2 of them back, and they'll take them. They'll take them, and they'll pay the shipping both ways.
Bill says after jumping the gun last week, Bill certainly didn't wait around after we gave our feedback regarding his SVS package purchase. I have no idea what we said. I don't remember.
Well, hopefully the photos remind you. That's why I put them.
Turns out we were right about the subwoofers with the Ultra Towers and the Ultra Center up front. The SB 1000 Pro that he ordered just wasn't keeping up, and his old Mirage sub wasn't keeping up with the SB 100. So he also preferred the easy wall mounting of the Prime elevations for his surrounds rather than the Prime satellites, and he really wanted that gloss white finish. So after a very pleasant phone call with SVS, he returned the SB 1000 Pro. All of the Prime satellites and Prime elevations he had ordered, they were all in gloss black. And in their place, he bought a pair of SB 3000 subs and several pairs of Prime elevations, but in white this time. Doing the exchange with SVS was as easy as could be. Amelia.
That's right. And it is. Everybody says that. We know that from experience. They do make it as easy
I love
as
it when people come to Reddit and they're like, I don't understand. My SVS is doing something weird. What should I do? Everybody's like, call SVS. I mean, it's like the only thing Reddit can agree on is that calling SVS is the solution to the SVS problems. So now, he says, with the room being roughly 14 by 25 feet and enclosed, with his primary seats about 10 feet from the front wall, another row of seats planned behind those, he wants to make sure he has enough amplifier power. You do.
That's the short answer.
He's going for the full 7.2.4 configuration that his Denon X3700H can manage. He has a 2-channel 60 watt per channel 8 into 8 ohms amplifier on hand. It's an Adcom GFA 535 2.
Yes.
The second
version of it, I
two
guess.
Eyes.
That's right.
I don't know. That should be fine for power in the rear heights, right? Yes.
Yes,
so does
absolutely.
he need any more power, or is he good to go? Yeah, you're fine. You're fine. Okay, first of all, you're not sitting farther away than, what, like 10 or 12
I mean, he's
feet?
closer than 10 feet because he's 10 feet from the front wall in his primary
Right.
seats.
Well, I mean, I guess if you think like the speakers are real wide, maybe he's
Sure.
at still
Yeah.
10 feet.
It's
maybe
not going to be.
11
It's not
feet.
going to be more than 10 feet.
It's not going to be 16.
No. So, I mean, I think if we're being cautious, we would say that the distance has reduced the output of the speakers by 6 decibels. I would probably say 5 decibels, but if we're being cautious, we could maybe say 6. I mean, what I can get at quite easily is the Ultra Towers, the Ultra Center, they're right around 88 decibels with 1 watt from 1 meter away into their 8 ohm nominal impedance. So from your distance, I would probably say that 1 watt is giving you 82 decibels quite easily. That's 1 watt. So to hit reference volume for sustained reference volume, you need 2 watts, which I'm pretty darn sure that your X3700H can muster. But if we then go, well, you need 2 watts to do a sustained 85, that would be a 200 watt transient peak. in order to get the 105 reference level peaks. So we can see how amplifier power goes up really quickly. That's just the math of it. The math is saying that 2 watts should be able to sustain 85 decibels all day long in your given your seating distance and the sensitivity of these speakers that you have. And then a 200 watt transient peak might be necessary once in a while for that 105 full reference volume transient peak. So the X3700H rated at 105 watts per channel, that's 2 channels driven, so it can do that all day long, 105 watts, but just into 2 channels simultaneously. That, if we work out the math, and the trick there is you take those 2 at 105 and then you divide 105 by 4. You take 25% of that and then multiply that by the number of remaining channels. That sort of gives you the total amount of power on hand. And that actually lines up really well with taking about half of the total power draw that's given in the specs. If you take about half of that for a Class AB based amplifier, you're going to be in the same ballpark. And those numbers all line up if you look at what the specs say. So you'll be right at around 45 watts continuous, all channels driven. So easily going to be, it's never going to happen, but easily you're going to be able to. But if you're trying to think in terms of all channels driven, what type of amp do I have? You basically got a 40 to 45 watt, all channels driven 9-channel amplifier in that X3700H. That means that if we're looking at the power draw it can do into a single channel for a transient peak, it's about 190 watts. So all the math says you've got exactly what you need to hit exactly full reference volume from your seating distance with these speakers with this sensitivity. If you're super worried about it, I could say that a 3-channel Emotiva Bass X A3 amp for $500 and power your front 3 speakers with that would I mean, now you're going beyond reference level, and obviously the surrounds and overheads are no problem to power because they're closer and don't get as much content as the front 3 channels. You are forbidden from going any further than a $500 3-channel amp, as far as I'm concerned. Then you're just tumbling down a rabbit hole that you don't need to. So mathematically, you don't really need to do anything at all if you got the $500 3-channel Bass X A3 amp from Emotiva. I wouldn't hate you for it. It's kind of fun to have, but you don't mathematically need it.
There you go. I cannot stress how loud full reference volume is.
It's IMAX.
Everybody thinks that they listen at full reference volume.
That's right.
You do not. None of you do. Almost none of you do. I would be shocked if anyone listens at full reference volume. Like, I walk out of an IMAX theater going, that was just too loud.
Yeah.
That was just too loud. That was not comfortable. There were times in there that if I had volume control, I would have turned it down. It was too loud in there. And that is, so if you're like, oh, but he said 200 watts, but this is only to 190 watts. So, clearly I'm the 10 watts shy, and then that's going to be a problem. It's never going to be a problem.
That's also the back of the napkin math for getting to that 200. Yeah. That's the, No, you're there.
You're fine.
Yes.
Curt has a BenQ HT 2050A projector. It was $750, now down to $700 at $700. It's a 1080p DLP projector, and its big claim to fame were its RGB color wheel that allowed it to actually show Rec 709 colors properly, plus a bit of vertical lens shift, which is uncommon for DLP projectors at this price. It is a very low price. Obviously, a JVC at 10 times the price or more would be nice, but he wants to keep the price down. I don't know if you're going to keep it down at $700. But how much does he need to spend these days to see a noticeable improvement in contrast and black levels over his HT 2050A? With a BenQ HT 3550 and Epson 3800, both priced at $1,700, do it? Or would he be stepping up to a BenQ HT 5550 instead of a 3550 at $2,700, or Epson 5050 UB at $3,000 before contrast and black levels would be truly noticeable? See, it kind of depends on how you define noticeable. Like, you put something side by side, it's really quite noticeable. That is easy. The question is like, my projector is broken, so I bought a new one. It came in, I set it up, I calibrated, I looked at it and went, wow, these black levels are fill in the blank. And that has happened to me in using a you know, like I'm not going to compare the projector brands because it was an immaterial at the time. It was a business class projector that I had on backup, and then my regular projector, which was a home theater class DLP style projector, that the bulb was out and I needed to get a new bulb in, and so I was waiting for that. So I put the other one up there and went, man, this sucks. I mean, these colors are off. The black levels are atrocious. I can't believe I ever thought this was good. You know, that's the difference. So we're not talking about noticeable. We're talking about obvious is what you're really asking.
Yeah, because you're not going to be doing the side-by-side comparison.
You're not going to do the side-by-side. So, Rob, which one will give him the noticeable, like, you couldn't miss it unless there was seriously something wrong with your eyes?
It's going to be the $2,700 to $3,000 ones. Unfortunately, I wish I had better news, but honestly, what you're paying much more for in the case of the in-betweeners, the $1,700 ones, the BenQ 3550, the Epson 3800, what you're paying for with those is the ability to show 4K. That's where all the money went. That's where the $1,000 went. The contrast and black levels didn't really get any better than your HT 2058. Now, of course, if we measured it or if we had them side by side, is it possible to detect a difference? Probably, yes. I'm not saying they're literally identical, but the contrast and black levels weren't the big upgrade with those $1,700 models. It was the ability to show 4K and be compatible with an HDR signal. I'm not going to really say capable. I'm just going to say compatible with an HDR signal. Once you get to that HT50 550 from BenQ, or particularly the Epson 5050 UB, the Epson 5050 UB is the runaway. If you didn't see a difference, then you just didn't tell us that you're actually watching with all of your lights on in sunlight, because that's not going to make a difference to the black levels and contrast if that's your room.
You have no idea how to set up a projector.
We're assuming that with a projector, you at least have the lights turned off and the curtains drawn, if not a completely blacked out room. But in a dim environment, the Epson 5050 UB is going to be the most noticeable difference in all of these by a pretty wide margin. Second best is that BenQ HD 5550, but even there, it's not, I mean, it's a noticeable difference. It's also a dimmer projector than your HT 2050A, just straight up. Its peak brightness is not as high, but its black levels and contrast are improved. So I'm almost like, if you can, you would go for the Epson 5050 UB, because that's the one where you're going to go, yeah, I spent a lot more money. I spent 3.5 times as much money, almost 4 times as much money to get to that one, but the difference is obvious. And that's the way I have to put it.
All right. Raf says, let's imagine you are running a surround sound setup with no subwoofers at all. I will not. I'm not doing that.
Hypothetical.
I'm not imagining it. All the AV receiver manuals say that if you set subwoofer output to none, then the front, left, and right main speakers will automatically get set to large, and all of the bass, including the LFE channel, and the bass from any speaker set to small will now be sent to the front, left, and right speakers. I literally just wrote an article about this, so that he must have read it. But what if you set all of the speakers to large? Where will the LFE channel get sent in that scenario? Will it still go to the front, left, and right speakers only, where all speakers now play the LFE channel since they're all set to large? All the bass, okay, any speaker set to large gets its own bass for sure.
The bass from that channel in the signal now just gets played. Nothing gets diverted from the speaker channels anywhere else. They all just play what the signal has in it.
And the LFE channel, from my recollection of the manual I read, says that it goes to the front speakers.
It goes to the front, left, right. Yeah, Monoprice.
Go ahead.
Their HTP1 really specifies it. They specify it more clearly than anybody else's, and they just say, there's a quote right from their manual, when there is no subwoofer, the bass manager would direct the LFE channel to the main speakers. This is the only time the LFE channel would not be sent to the subwoofer. So it's the main channels. That's been my experience with all other AV receivers too. It doesn't, I mean, I can see his thinking. He's like, hey, if they're all set to large, does the LFE get sent to all the speakers? That hasn't been my experience. It's not what Monoprice specifically says in theirs. The LFE channel gets sent to the front, left, and right main speakers only.
So your thought process here, and let me try to walk everybody else through it real quick. It makes complete sense.
Yes.
Okay, so any bass that was intended to come out of a specific speaker or in a specific area. By let's just say that any bass that was created by an object, wherever it is in the room, should come out of the speaker nearest that object. And that would be true is if that bass information was programmed into the main layer.
Sure. And
the main
that thinking
layer.
is also why people end up going, shouldn't all my speakers be large and capable of playing down to 20 hertz individually? Because that way, the whatever channel information said play in that speaker plays all of that channel information. But
so if you have nothing but large speakers, or you set all your speakers to large, then that's what will happen for each one of those things. But your LFE is its own channel.
That's correct.
It is not tied to an object in the room. It is separate. Therefore, rather than trying to figure out, like the processor trying to figure out what object it was in relation to, it is its own thing. So it just gets sent to one place, which in most cases would be the subwoofer. In this case, they're like, well, they may be lying about how large the rest of their speakers are, but they're least likely to lie about the front, left, and right. So let's put it there. So if that kind of walks everybody else through it. Aras says, closing date on their new house is quickly approaching. After our advice, he will probably dish the idea of hanging his OLED on the ceiling. Good, because I specifically made that title so that you wouldn't do it. OLED on the ceiling with a rig for it to swing down in front of a projection screen, but he's pushing ahead with making his own shallow depth speaker cabinets for his in-wall speakers and essentially turning them into on-walls. With his woodworking skills, he'll be able to make them look really nice. Great. That sounds great.
Thumbs up to that.
They want to do some painting, and for the theater room, he'd like to go with Sherwin-Williams gray screen that we always recommend. At least somebody listens to the podcast enough to not ask us the same question again. But he says, does he need to prime before he paints? The walls are currently white, so he's thinking the coat of primer shouldn't be necessary. But he wasn't sure if primer has an effect on the sheen of the finish. So what do we recommend on that front? So I swear, it seems like almost all paints these days are like paint plus primer. Like they all seem to be that way.
That is quite easy to find. Yep.
But with the white wall, I would not prime it. But that's because I am lazy.
It shouldn't be necessary. Although if you're going from high gloss currently to something closer to matte, then there might be a bit of that. My honest advice is, I've always been very pleased by the service people at Sherwin-Williams stores because they ask you all the questions and make a recommendation across their pretty extensive lineup of paints and paint plus primers to say, okay, based on the room and the finish that you want and what the condition of the walls are currently, this is the one that should work for you. So I highly recommend talking to the salesperson. I really have never felt like I was steered wrong, for sure. But yeah, the one that they have, the one that I ended up going with is, they call it their super paint. It is paint plus primer. It's exceedingly good at covering up whatever is behind, on the walls currently and turning it into the finish that you want. It also comes in my personal favorite sheen that they offer, which is the velvet, because in Sherwin-Williams lineup there is flat at the very bottom, which is the one where if your shirt sleeve brushes against it, you'll see the mark on it. So I'm not a fan of that. There is the step above flat is matte. Which we normally think of, which is, again, I mean, it is a very, very matte finish and easy to scuff. The step above that is velvet. And then eggshell comes after velvet, and then satin after eggshell. So I like that velvet finish. It's just a little bit more durable to the point where I'm not worried about anything glancing against the wall and leaving a visible mark on it, but it's essentially completely non-reflective. It has exceedingly low sheen to it. So that's available in the Super Paint finish. So if somehow you're, I don't know, ordering it online or they don't talk to you, I'd feel comfortable recommending the velvet finished Super Paint, but they will talk to you. So yeah, I'd go with their advice.
Okay. So he's been hearing that Dolby made some slight changes to their Atmos speaker layout guidelines. Do we know where we can go? He can go to find the latest. What? Did they finally take my recommendation and fix their stupid diagrams?
Well, the biggest change that they made is that on their website and in their white paper, they now specifically mention an 11.1.8 layout. So they've gone beyond 9.1.6 to 11.1.8 now. This adds an additional pair of independent surround speakers that go between regular surrounds and surround backs. So they've added the surround 2, I think, is actually how they end up being labeled in the Dolby Atmos renderer. But regardless, it's an additional pair of surround speakers between the surrounds and the surround backs, and then 8 overhead speakers. So front heights, top fronts, top rears, and rear heights. That's a new lineup that they've done in there. But they did update a couple of things. So they're no longer just saying line up the overhead speakers the same width apart as the front, left, and right. In that white paper, it's now saying take the total width of your system, and normally we have our surround speakers on our 2 side walls, so that's essentially the width of the room. But take the total width of the system and figure out half to 0.7, so essentially half to 3/4 of the width of your system. The width apart of your overhead speakers should now be that. It should be somewhere between half and about 3/4 of the total width of your system. That's the way that they describe it now. And yeah, then I think there was one other thing, which is on their website. They're actually kind of walking back the everything be at ear level now, and they actually have there a clear path. Create a clear path between you and your speakers. If you can't see the speaker, sound is being blocked.
We need to get credit for this.
I know, right?
We need to get credit for this. This is some BS right here. They're stealing our stuff. And then they're not giving us credit. 9.1.6. I'm still scrolling through this white document trying to find this 11. There it is, 11.1.8.
Oh, yes, 11.1.8. It's a lot of speakers. But they talk about it now. That white paper, that PDF, now does also say, if possible, the height of the rear speakers should be the same as the height of the front speakers. If this is impractical, the rear speakers may be positioned higher than the front speakers. However, we suggest that the height of the rear speakers not be more than 1.25 times the height of the front speakers. Essentially, they're saying, if things are at 4 feet, put the heights, the surround and surround back speakers at 5 feet. But again, clear line of sight. They've actually put that in clear language on the website now, a clear path. If you can't see the speaker from your seat, the speaker can't send its sound unobstructed to you. So that's been the update, and that's about it.
Am I reading the rest of this thing? In his all right. In his plans, he's been working on the assumption that 4 overhead speakers should be lined up with his front, left, and right main speakers, but now he's hearing they should maybe be a bit closer, as Rob just went through. And then his surround speakers should just be a little bit above seated ear level so that they have a clear line of sight to all listeners, but they be directly left and right 90 degrees from the main listening position. Well, what we said is now true, even though they didn't give us credit because they're jerks. And honestly, we're talking about a couple of inches, difference here. It's not going to be,
like
your overheads being directly in line with your front, left, and rights, and your whatever.
It's the thing of if you put your front, left, and rights at exactly the 30-degree azimuth, plus and minus 30 degrees to left and right, that might be so wide apart that your overhead speakers are pretty darn close to the side walls now. Or you went for the really large projection screen up front, so it forced your front, left, and right speakers close to the front corners. If you were rigidly sticking to the overhead speakers, have to make a line with those, they're a bit unreasonably wide apart. So they're saying, okay, take the total width and have the distance between your overhead speakers about half to 3/4 of the total width of your setup. So that part is how they might end up narrower than your front, left, and right speakers. So that part's nice and clear now. Should the surround speakers be exactly 90 degrees to the side? Well, that's the recommendation if you have surround back speakers. If you have a 5-speaker floor layout, then they want the surround speakers at 110 to 120 degrees, so a little bit behind you. But the range is still 90 to 110, even if you have surround back speakers as well. So it's no further forward than directly to your sides, and a little bit behind you is still very much okay. And Tom and I usually prefer to have them a little bit behind us, because when they're directly 90 degrees to the side, you can kind of notice it just shooting into your ear from that side. I like to have it just a little bit behind, and that is well within the Dolby guidelines, to have it a little bit behind you.
Right. So, like everything Dolby, it seems, they make some changes that, common sense would have gotten you there anyways, because people are so rigid. People read their recommendations and are so rigid that they are incapable of saying, that's not going to work in my room.
Sure.
That's just not the way it's going to work. I mean, the easiest way to say it is, how wide is your couch? That's how wide your overhead speaker should be. I mean, that's just as good as anything else. Gurinder. At the moment, Gurinder's basement home theater, in his basement home theater, there is an 8-foot wide opening on the left. All the other walls are standard construction. So for closing off the 8-foot opening, is there any point trying to isolate the new wall studs from the floor and ceiling, doing a double stud wall since he has a space, and doing 2 layers of drywall with green glue in between? Should he use joist insulation brackets at the top of the new studs and rubber insulation still at the bottom? Isolation, sorry. At the still under the bottom plate, there will be a single door in this new wall regardless. So he's saying that he's going to build a new wall in front of his old wall?
No, he's got an 8-foot opening. He's going to erect a wall to fill in that 8-foot opening with a door in it. Should he put a rubber isolation gasket underneath the bottom plate? Should he put joist isolators along the top plate so that the newly constructed studs are, damped and separated from the existing structure? Should he do a double stud wall? None of those things.
This is none of those things. Yeah. It's like, I'm going to just take one outlet of my room and fill it up with the insulation putty or whatever it's called so that sound will not leak out of that one outlet in my room. Is it going to make a difference? Well, if you're putting your ear up to the outlet on the other side, maybe. But for everybody, the sound's still going to come through everywhere else.
So you're gonna
just build a regular old wall.
You're gonna match the stud configuration that you already have for the rest of the room. That's all you need to do, because anything other than that is more expensive. So and given that it's not going to do anything, there's just no point in going more expensive. Just match the current stud. In Canada, since Gurinder's in Canada, we do by code have to have a sill gasket underneath our bottom plate, or use pressure-treated wood as the bottom plate. So you're still going to have a sill gasket, but as Ted White has said over at soundproofingcompany.com, he's not a fan of using the isolation gaskets underneath bottom plates because you end up screwing through them into the foundation or subfloor below them anyway, and it's pointless, and they degrade a little bit over time. So he'd rather just avoid that whole mess and just use regular sill gasket or pressure-treated wood as your bottom plate. That's still going to screw into your regular subfloor foundation as the rest of your walls have. You're not going to bother isolating from the joist because the rest of your walls aren't. Now, the thing you might end up doing is maybe you end up doing 2 layers of drywall and green glue for the whole theater. You don't even have to take down the existing drywall to do that. You would be adding a second layer of drywall with green glue for the entire theater, but doing it just for the 8-foot span isn't going to make any sense. So that's it. That's what you need to do.
All right, last one. Shawn. Shawn's room is 13 by 18 with a door in the rear left corner. The room is carpeted, but he's still in the process of making DIY acoustic panels. He'll be sticking with a 7-speaker setup for now. He came across someone selling a used Marantz SR6011 for only $300. He has a Denon X2200W. As mentioned, he doesn't have any intention to expend to 9 or 11 speakers. So would a SR6011 be worthwhile in any other way, or would it be better to just hang on to that money so we can spend it on something newer down the road? If the Odyssey isn't different, I don't see any reason to do this.
So I mean, it's XT to XT32.
So yeah, then I would that I don't know if that's worth $300.
Yeah, that's so. I mean, the differences are it's that upgrade from Odyssey XT to XT32. It's being able to use the Odyssey Editor app because the X2200W is old enough that it cannot use the Odyssey Editor app.
Sure.
Obviously, it's being able to go to 9 or 11 speakers instead of topping out at 7, but he's not interested in doing that anyway. And then the SR6011 has a full set of pre-outs. The X2200W doesn't have any pre-outs. So it's those 3 things. It's the difference in the Odyssey, including the Odyssey Editor app, the greater number of speakers, which we know doesn't matter in this case, and the ability to hook up an external amp if you wanted to. That just isn't an option with the X2200W. So if you're not, and I'm reading ahead, he doesn't have a lot of interest in adding an external amp. It's only the Odyssey difference. That's the only thing you'd be getting out of it, would be really the Odyssey Editor app. Because, I mean, the difference from XT to XT32, not a gigantic difference in what you would end up hearing. So is being able to use the Odyssey Editor app worth $300 to you? That, I think, ends up ultimately being the question. Well, I can't answer that for you. You'd have to answer that for yourself. But, I mean, there's no HDMI upgrades going on with an SR6011. So you're still at HDMI 2.0 in either case. It's still Atmos, still DTSX. So it's really the Odyssey Editor app. Is that worth $300 to you? If the answer to that is, nah, not really, then I'd hold on to that $300 and be able to put it towards something else in the future.
Yeah. His current front, left, and right main speakers are the RBH R55 Ti towers. He would like to switch to bookshelf front speakers, so he's really hoping he could achieve an upgrade in terms of clarity and refinement. You have chosen poor speakers to upgrade from. To be honest with you,
takes a
RBHs
bit. Yeah.
RBHs are remarkable, and those particular speakers in, you know, those specific speakers are hard to upgrade from. He's also really hoping he could achieve an upgrade in terms of clarity and refinement. Okay, but one other thing, he sometimes likes to leave the door open with the speakers cranked way up as he roams around the rest of his house. So he'd like speakers that can get very loud, and isn't really looking to add any external amplification. He's willing to spend as much as $2,000 a pair. What do we suggest? Okay, I suggest you keep your speakers.
But he wants to switch to bookshelf, so obviously
I do know
that's
that.
the big form
I know.
factor difference. Yeah,
I understand that, but do you really? I mean, how dedicated? So what you're asking for is a sonic upgrade, which is hard to achieve over the RBHs to begin with because they are an exceedingly neutral speaker. You know, I have heard a lot of RBH models, a lot. I've heard the predecessors to these, which were the EMP Tech, whatever they were called, and I've heard everything all the way up to like some of their top of the line stuff. And what you get when you spend more money on RBH is essentially extension, volume, and a little bit of clarity, but not necessarily a ton. You know, it's just they just get louder and make sure that they hit more all the notes a little bit better, and they get a little bit, you know, more refined. Yeah,
like when he says refinement, I'm like, you've got those DIY acoustic panels still in the pipeline. You've got them planned, but you haven't put them up yet. I'm like, do that first, because that might get you the refinement that you're searching for with your current speakers without having replaced the speakers at all.
But then you're asking for a speaker that you can blast out through your entire house, and you want it to be physically smaller. And you don't want to add amplification. This is like, I would like to take my family of 12, and I no longer want to own a big van. I would like to own a compact car, but I still want my entire family to sit.
So, I mean, the thing about those RBH Impression Series towers is they can play very, very loud, but they do need a beefy amplifier to get them there, because they're not super high sensitivity, but they have crazy high power handling, and they can get insanely loud. So they're certainly capable of the output, but there might be the instance where you go, well, I wasn't planning on adding external amplifiers or paying the $300 for this used SR6011, but that might be the justification, would be you don't have to spend any money on new speakers, but you get the SR6011 so that you can have the pre-outs, and then you get a beefy, at least 2-channel amplifier so that you can really crank up those RBH towers. But I mean, I really only had one thought to point you to. If we are going to switch to a bookshelf and we aren't going to add any external amps, that means I want a very sensitive, very high output bookshelf speaker, and HSU's CCB8 is the one that came to mind. They're $440 each after shipping. So with a $2,000 budget, you could have all three. You could replace the whole front 3 within that budget and have 3 matching CCB8s from HSU going across the front. So, I mean, that was like kind of the only one that leapt to mind for me. Would I call them an upgrade in clarity and refinement? Probably not. I mean, they're kind of a sideways move in that. They are more sensitive. That's just objectively true. They will get louder per watt than your Impression Series towers, and they are the bookshelf form factor. They are a big bookshelf. They are chunky boys, because that is an 8-inch woofer in there. So it might look like a nice almost satellite speaker size thing in the pictures. That's an 8-inch woofer in there. They're nearly a foot wide, so they are chunky bookshelf speakers. But
Right.
that would be the one I would point you to. I don't know if Tom has any other suggestions. That would
I don't.
Go beyond those.
Again, my suggestion is to not spend $2,000
Right.
on bookshelf speakers, and instead keep these and buy an amp. You know, and I mean, first of all, looks wise, you're going to have a hard time beating the RBHs. Full stop. You're going to get these HSUs, which may have the performance parameters that you were looking for and the size-ish form factor you were looking for, but they definitely don't have the aesthetics that the RBHs
they're just
do.
Black boxes.
Black
That's what
boxes.
the HSUs are.
So I don't have a better recommendation other than to question again why you, if what you really want is all these other things. A lot of what you're asking for, I think, will be achieved through room treatments. Do not buy any more speakers until you finish your room treatments and get them up.
Well, particularly, I mean, even the quote unquote clarity could definitely, because if you're talking about voices, I'm playing 2-channel music and the voices, I want a little bit more clarity. I'm like, getting rid of the reflections in your room, that might be exactly what happens. So yeah, we're not necessarily saying you're not going to spend any money at all. You might end up getting that SR6011 mainly just to get the pre-outs. You might end up adding a pretty beefy amplifier so that you can truly crank up those Impression Series towers as they're capable of handling, because they really are. So that might be the way to spend your $2,000 instead.
All right, who do we have left?
On the list are Kris, spelled with a K, Chris, spelled with a CH, and Infinite Gary.
All right. We want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Aras for going to avrant.com, clicking on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link and sending us a PayPal donation, as well as our 138 patrons over at patreon.com.
Yes, indeed. Aras, thank you so much for the PayPal donation, and big thank you to our 138 Patreon patrons. Thank you all so much for the financial support.
I also want to thank Greg for talking us up to AV Science, as well as our notes of gratitude from Curt, Aras, Gurinder, Dazz, and Kris.
Yeah, for sure. Greg, thank you for talking us up to AV Science. Hopefully they start to get to know about us. And Curt, Aras, Gurinder, Dazz, and Kris, thank you all very much for the notes of gratitude sent to us for keeping the podcast going. Notes of encouragement are super appreciated, and a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
And if you want your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AV Rant, I'm Tom Andrew.
And I'm Rob H. Now stay in and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AV Rant.
Now go out and listen to something.